Okay, here we go, linear graphs, lesson number 5. So here's a story. Ruby used her house as a cat shelter. She let it get out of hand and ended up with 80 cats. She then decided to find them good homes, giving away 5 cats per week. So that's the story. Here's the graph that goes with the story. You see that the y-axis is labeled number of cats, and the x-axis is labeled weeks. So let's go ahead and take the story, take the graph, and let's analyze how this graph represents the story. So let's look at this first thing. What is the y-intercept? So I go to the y-axis, right? We know this is the y-axis and this is the x-axis. And I go and I see that my y-intercept is 80. Now I could write that as a point, right? I could write that as 0, 80, but we're just going to put 80. So what does the y-intercept mean? If we go back to the story and we see the number 80, it says she let it get out of hand and ended up with 80 cats. So her house, at the point of time where she let it get out of hand, had 80 cats. So let's go back and talk about that in the beginning. Now this in the beginning is kind of misleading with this story, because in the beginning she didn't have 80 cats. But at the start of things getting out of hand, she had 80 cats. So when we're looking at this graph, we know that 80 represents how many cats she had at the start of when things got out of hand. So y-intercept, when we talk about what y-intercept means, we're usually going to use terms like at the start, or in the beginning, or initially. Let's see what else. What's the x-intercept? So when we're looking at the x-intercept, we're looking at the x-axis and where the graph intercepts the x-axis, and it is 16. So what does 16 mean? If we went back to the story, there's not a 16, is there? So we have to gather meaning from what's going on in the graph. So when things were getting out of hand, when time started, when things were out of hand, she was at 80. And each week, now this is really weird because the weeks are not going 0, 1, 2, 4. They're going 0, 2, 4, 6. So they're being scaled by 2. So if we looked at after 1 week, we would see that she had given away 5 cats, right? Let's go back to the story. Sorry, I don't have it all on the same thing. But she decided to give away 5 cats per week. And so when we look back at what does the 16 mean, it means that as each week progressed, right, she gave away 5 cats the first week and another 5 cats the second week. She kept giving away 5 cats until finally, what happened on the 16th week? That's right, she had 0 cats. So on the 16th week, or by the 16th week, she had 0 cats left. So this is what we're doing in this section. We're looking at stories, we're going to be graphing them, and we're going to be analyzing the graphs, because that's a real life skill that we need to have. We need to be able to look at visual things like graphs and make sense of them. So I don't know if you guys know about this, but me and Mr. Matchner have this competition, and we decided it's time now to get ready for our annual push-up competition. Now I know Mr. Matchner's got the muscles, but you know what? I'm determined, and that counts. So Mr. Matchner can already do 20 push-ups and has plans to increase the amount he can do by 5 push-ups a week. We're not asking you to come up with an equation that describes this story, but if you can, that's awesome. But here's the equation that describes the story. Y equals 5x plus 20. Now, I can already do 5 push-ups, but I hired a personal trainer so I can increase the amount that I can do by 10 push-ups a week. I am so determined. And I didn't like losing to Mr. Matcher last year, and I am super motivated. And so here's the equation that represents how I'm going to go about preparing for the competition. So you've got the story. Now we want to make our graph. In the first story, we had a graph that we just looked at. In the second story, we are going to make our graph. So the first thing we're going to do is label both axes. So let's see what's going on in our story. We've got number of push-ups, and do we have days or weeks? We have weeks. So time is always going to be our x-axis. So we're going to say weeks here. Time is always the independent variable, which the x-axis, anything on the x-axis represents like our input or independent variable. And time is independent of everything, right? Time just keeps on ticking. Doesn't depend on you getting up. Time's already there. So weeks is going to be our label for our x-axis. And then number of push-ups, so we'll just put push-ups, is going to be the label for our y-axis. And so now we have to decide how to scale the weeks and the push-ups. And so we look to the story to give us an idea of how we want to scale. So let's see. Mr. Matcher can already do 20 push-ups. So it wouldn't make sense, don't do this, it wouldn't make sense to scale it by ones, right? Oh no, we would never get to 20. So that's a bad idea. So we know we want to scale it so that we can hit 20 way before the top, because Mr. Matcher is going to increase that. So then we also notice that weeks, we want to have a representation of the right amount of weeks. So let's think about a clue here. I see that Mr. Matcher's slope is 5. And that my slope, my rate of change, is 10. So it might be a good idea to go up by 5s, the smaller of the two slopes. So let's do that. If we scale our y-axis by 5s, we'd have 5 there, then 10, then 15, then 20, then 25, 30, 35, and 40. And we'll practice in class how to choose good numbers to scale. But going up by 5s makes sense. Okay, and so we think about the weeks, and I think we're going to be okay going up 1 week at a time. I think if we tried to do 2 weeks at a time, it would just make graphing a little bit more difficult than it needs to. So let's go ahead and go up by 1 week at a time. Is it okay to have a different scale for the x-axis than for the y? Absolutely. All right, so let's start graphing just based on the story. So Mr. Matcher can do 20 push-ups. So he starts at 20. So let's see, I'm going to make him a solid line. I'm also going to make him green. So he starts at 20, and I see that he goes up. His rate of change is 5. So that means that every week he goes up by 5, so up 5 over 1. So on the first week, he can do 25, up 5 over 1. The second week, he can do 30, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to go ahead and get Mr. Matcher's line in there. We're going to connect our dots. And there's Mr. Matcher's story as a graph. So now I'm going to switch colors for me. Let's get a really great, I don't know, how about hot pink? That sounds good. And I'm going to go ahead and start with my graph. So my graph has a y-intercept of 5. So this is where I start. But my rate of change is 10. That means every week I can do 10 more. So instead of going up 5, like Mr. Matcher was, up 5 over 1, up 5 over 1, I go up 10. So I go up, that's 5, that's 10 over 1. Does that make sense? I went boop, boop, because that's 10. 2 jumps is a 10 over 1. 2 jumps over 1, 2 jumps over 1, 2 jumps over 1, 2 jumps over 1, and that's all I can do. So I'm going to go ahead and connect my dots. And as I do this, we'll try to connect them in a very straight line. So hopefully you guys are using rulers. Okay, that's good enough. So as I'm looking at my line, I'm very impressed. Like, wow, I'm improving really fast, aren't I? So let's stop and ask what each y-intercept is, so and what it means. So the first y-intercept is mine, which is a 5, and the second y-intercept is Mr. Matchner's, which is a 20. So what do they mean? Well, they always mean in the beginning or at the start. I like in the beginning because it really does describe the story. In the beginning, Mr. M could do 20 push-ups and Miss O could do 5. Okay? Who has a steeper line? Me. Gosh darn, I was supposed to make my line dotted, wasn't I? Okay, well, I made it hot pink, so you can tell. Hopefully on yours, on your thing, you can tell that the difference because you made it dotted. Or maybe you used different colors. So let's see. Who has a steeper line? Miss O does. And what does that mean? It means that the number of push-ups I did increased at a faster pace, right? So you can put that in different ways. You can say, well, let's just say, number of push-ups she could do increased at a faster rate than Mr. O. You could kind of say, my effort was better, of course. No shade on Mr. M, but all right. So if the push-up competition was in 4 weeks, who would win? Well, we're going to look at our graph to find that out. So we're going to go ahead and look at 4 weeks right here, and we'll look up to where our Mr. Matchner at 4 weeks, Mr. M equals 40, and at 4 weeks, Miss O equals 45. So who wins? Miss O, yay! All right, so this is what we're going to be working on for this part of the unit, graphing by looking at a story. So we're going to look at a story, we're going to set up a graph, and then we're going to make sense of what our graph represents. So thanks for joining me, and have fun practicing.